Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Colin. I've never given a 6-minute, 40-second talk ever with 20 slides. And so what I've tried to do is to basically condense about a 225-page book into that amount of time. So I don't know how effective that'll be, but this is a book called Architectural Design and Ethics, Tools for Survival. It deals with a lot of the issues of design for the other 90%, just out by Elsevier, the architectural press in England. So if you want to hear more, or maybe you won't, but after I talk, if you want to hear more, you can find it in this book. Okay, so I don't control these slides. I'm just going to go, right? So here we go. The I-35W bridge is not just a symbol of our failing infrastructure, but a metaphor for our fracture-critical culture. Never have humans like that bridge been more connected and more efficient and less resilient than we are now. We are the most vulnerable species on the planet the very moment we think ourselves invincible. We assume we can design our way out of every problem without thinking that we are also constrained by the larger ecosystems we depend on. The ecologist Buzz Howling has shown how ecosystems collapse when too much connectedness and efficiency leads to too little resiliency, returning us to a less connected, less efficient, and more resilient state. The exponential growth of some part of an ecosystem typically triggers a collapse, as it does when there is an exponential increase in the stress of a bridge structure. We're in the midst of several exponential growth curves, one of which is human population, which will grow from 2 to 9 billion in just 100 years, the largest increase ever in human history. Another exponential growth has occurred in atmospheric carbon, which will increase in our lifetime as much as 60% to a level unprecedented in human history. This will likely trigger climate changes so disruptive as to render as many as 200 million people environmental refugees and to cause the rest of us to radically readjust our lives. A third exponential growth curve has been the rise of enormous wealth inequities across the planet. Now 2% of the world's population controls 50% of the wealth, while 50% of the world's population controls less than 2% of the wealth. Designers have focused on that 2% of the population while largely ignoring the needs of over 3 billion people who need design more than anyone else. A fourth and maybe the most dangerous exponential curve of all is the sixth extinction that we have triggered. Biologists like E.O. Wilson estimate that 50% of all the species living right now will be extinct in 50 years. Species that we depend on in everything from our food to our medicine to the very air that we breathe. The biophysicist Geoffrey West has discovered a constant relationship between the mass and metabolism, or use of energy, of every species on the planet with one exception, which is us. Because of modern technology, the modern human now uses the same amount of energy as a blue whale. So we now live on a planet of 6+ billion blue whales, which is us, which is no wonder the world is under stress. A huge paradox underlies this. Adam Smith calls it the paradox of value, where we value diamonds that have little use to us and don't value water, which is essential to life. We design things to be scarce and one of a kind, and so we waste and abuse what we can't live without in order to have what we don't need. We also design monocultures that offer less and less real choice beyond the superficial differences of food products. We mostly depend on 4 plants: rice, wheat, corn, and soy. Disease to any one of them, as well as the competition we now see between food and fuel, drives up prices and poses an enormous threat to mass starvation globally. These threats can lead to violence, as we've seen with the repression and terrorism of recent years, but that triggers another paradox, which is that the more power we exert, the less powerful we are. The proper response to ecosystem collapse isn't to fight it, but to adjust, to design new, more sustainable ways of living. Design is key here. We now design all sorts of what the economist Manfred Max Nies calls pseudo-satisfiers that not only don't satisfy our basic needs, but end up making us feel more needy. Instead, the design community desperately needs to focus on the needs of all 9 billion people who will be alive 50 years from now, as well as the billions of other species we share this planet with. This will demand a new form of design practice, one closer to public health, in which we work not for wealthy clients and corporations, but instead for NGOs and governments, and using local materials and labor, indigenous talent and resources to solve the needs of real people that real people have in meeting real needs. This new profession, design as public health, is waiting to be born. One of the most resilient human designs is the town, especially when it stewards the local ecology. The very things we now mock about small towns, their lack of connectedness and their lack of efficiency in accomplishing things, are the very things that will make them most resilient as we look for places in which to thrive in the future. Another resilient part of a city is the neighborhood. The people most likely to survive any coming collapse are those who have the strongest communities with the greatest number of people available to help each other voluntarily. The strong neighborhoods and high volunteerism rates of the Twin Cities may make us one of the most resilient cities in the country. Design as public health uses what is at hand and reuses everything. The invention here lies not in the one-off high-energy creations we now award as designers, but in the inventive reinterpretation of what exists around us and in the innovative repurposing of what we already have. Every new design needs to have its reuse and recycling designed into it from the start. If we don't change course, collapse will occur in those areas growing the fastest, collapse of climate, of other species, or large segments of the human population. But if we begin now to redesign the unsustainable systems to become less connected, less efficient, and more resilient, we may be able to soften the landing when the fracture-critical bridge of modern culture falls. As we become less connected and efficient, we also need to reconnect to ourselves and to each other in new ways. We desperately need, for example, new belief systems that don't reinforce our old power structures, but that reconceive our relationship to and the responsibility to each other, to other species, and to future generations. The ultimate resiliency is internal to each of us. That will involve a reconnection with nature in which we recognize that we are an inseparable part of the natural world, and that the more we harm it, the more we harm ourselves. As Native Americans believed, we need to rediscover that we are the infant species, dependent on every other species that can live very well without us, even as we demand that they all serve us. So we have one of the most important choices ever faced by human beings before us. We can continue on the path we are on and extinguish most of the species we depend on as well as ourselves, or we can redesign everything, every system, every environment, every object, every landscape to reflect the resiliency that we will need in order to survive the collapse of our fracture-critical culture. Design can help us see that power comes from needing less, wealth from having less, and value from serving others. Our fundamental responsibility as designers is to learn to create with what's at hand, reusing or recycling everything and using as few resources as possible. Never before have we had such a design challenge, and never before will our failure to rise to the occasion have such catastrophic effects on all of us. Thank you.